The thunder of hooves echoed across the darkening plains as Lucas Parker rode hard toward his homestead, the bruised sky threatening to unleash its fury at any moment. It was April 1875, and the Montana Territory had seen one of the harshest springs in memory. He pulled his hat lower against the first drops of rain, his thoughts consumed by the cattle he'd need to check at first light and the leaking roof he'd been meaning to fix. The lonely life of a cattle rancher left little time for anything but work and survival, especially for a man who'd turned his back on his former life as a bounty hunter. As Lucas approached his modest ranch, something felt amiss. A flicker of light from the barn caught his eye. There shouldn't have been anything burning there. Instinctively, his hand moved to the Colt revolver, holstered at his side. Years on the frontier had taught him caution above all else. He dismounted silently, tethering his horse to a post far enough away to avoid alerting whoever was inside. The rain began to fall in earnest now, providing cover for his footsteps as he approached the barn's side entrance. With practiced stealth, Lucas eased the door open, drawing his revolver as he slipped inside. The barn was mostly dark, save for a small lantern that cast long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust, but when they did, he saw her, a woman huddled in the corner behind some hay bales, her clothes torn and muddied, her eyes wide with terror as she clutched something to her chest. A child. She was holding a small child who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Lucas lowered his gun immediately but remained where he stood. The woman looked like a cornered animal, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. "I don't mean you any harm," he said softly, holstering his weapon. "This is my ranch you found." The woman said nothing, only held the child tighter. In the dim light, Lucas could make out a bruise on her cheek and dried blood on her sleeve. "Rest," he said gently, removing his hat. "You're safe here tonight." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against the roof and the occasional nervous shuffle of horses in their stalls. Then the woman spoke, her voice barely audible. "They'll come looking for us." Lucas didn't ask who they were. He'd seen enough of the frontier's brutality to recognize the look of someone running for their life. "I'm Lucas Parker," he offered, still keeping his distance. "I've got a house just up the way with a proper fire and food if you're hungry." The woman hesitated, looking down at the sleeping child in her arms. "My name is Margareta," she finally said, her accent hinting at Eastern European origins. "Margareta Grayson. This is my daughter, Hannah." Lucas nodded, noticing how Margareta's hands trembled. "You're welcome to stay in the house. No one will harm you on my land, Mrs. Grayson." "Miss," she corrected quietly. "I was never married to Hannah's father." A flash of lightning illuminated the barn fully for a moment, and Lucas could see more clearly the extent of her injuries, not just the bruised face, but a makeshift bandage around her wrist and a pronounced limp as she finally stood. "Can you walk to the house?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I can manage," she said with quiet dignity, though her exhaustion was plain to see. Lucas moved slowly, retrieving a horse blanket and offering it to her. "For the rain. It's a short walk, but you'll be soaked through." Margareta accepted it gratefully, wrapping it around herself and her daughter. The child stirred but didn't wake as they stepped out into the downpour. The modest cabin came into view, a simple 2-room structure that Lucas had built with his own hands 5 years prior. It wasn't much, but it was solid, warm, and far from the prying eyes of civilization. He led them to the porch and opened the door, quickly moving to stoke the dying embers in the fireplace. "Please sit," he gestured to a worn but comfortable chair near the hearth. "I'll get some food prepared." Margareta sank into the chair, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. The sleeping child curled against her chest, innocent and unaware of their precarious situation. As Lucas busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon, he stole glances at his unexpected guests. Margareta Grayson was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a disheveled bun. Despite her current state, there was a natural grace to her movements and a quiet strength in her eyes that spoke of resilience. "How long have you been running?" he asked, placing a steaming plate before her. Margareta carefully adjusted Hannah in her lap before answering. 3 days. We couldn't stay in Copper Creek any longer. Lucas knew Copper Creek, a mining town, about 40 miles east. It had a reputation for lawlessness that rivaled the worst parts of Deadwood. Hannah's father, Margareta continued, her voice low so as not to wake the child. He's a man with influence there. When I tried to leave him, he... She trailed off, unconsciously touching the bruise on her face. You don't need to explain, Lucas said, his jaw tightening. Not tonight anyway. Eat, then get some rest. You can take my bed. I'll sleep out here. I couldn't possibly... I insist, he said firmly. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. Margareta studied him carefully, as if trying to decipher his motives. In a world where kindness often came with hidden costs, his generosity seemed almost suspicious. Why would you help strangers? She asked bluntly. Lucas poured himself a cup of coffee before answering. Because there was a time when no one helped me, he said simply, and I promised myself I wouldn't be that person. Something in his tone silenced further questions. Margareta ate quickly, the hot food bringing color back to her cheeks. When she finished, Lucas showed her to the small bedroom where a narrow but clean bed waited. If you need anything in the night, don't hesitate to wake me, he told her, pausing at the door. And Miss Grayson, you truly are safe here. I give you my word. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. Thank you, Mr. Parker. After she closed the door, Lucas settled into his chair by the fire, his mind troubled. He knew the type of man who would pursue a woman and child across open country, the kind who believed people were possessions, who wouldn't stop until he reclaimed what he considered his property. Lucas checked his revolver and placed it within easy reach before stretching out on a bedroll near the hearth. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by memories of his own violent past and the sound of the storm battering the cabin walls. Dawn broke with clearing skies and a stillness that suggested the worst of the storm had passed. Lucas rose early, tending to his horses and cattle before returning to the cabin. He found Margareta already awake, Hannah sitting on her lap as she braided the child's golden hair. Good morning, he said, removing his hat as he entered. How did you sleep? Better than I have in months, Margareta admitted. Hannah, too. The little girl regarded him with solemn blue eyes, clutching a small rag doll. She had her mother's delicate features but fair coloring that must have come from her father. Are you a real cowboy? Hannah asked suddenly, her small voice carrying a note of wonder. Despite himself, Lucas smiled. I suppose I am, though not the kind from those penny dreadfuls. I just raise cattle and keep to myself mostly. Mama says we're going far away where Papa can't find us, Hannah continued, seemingly oblivious to her mother's sudden discomfort. Hannah, that's enough, Margareta said gently. She looked up at Lucas apologetically. Children speak truths adults try to hide. Lucas nodded, moving to put coffee on the stove. I need to ride into town for supplies today, he said casually. If you'd like, I can inquire about the stagecoach schedule. The line runs through to Helena, and from there you could connect to points east. Margareta's face fell slightly. I don't have much money. What I had went to the man who brought us this far. Lucas turned to face her fully. I'm not rushing you out, Miss Grayson. You're welcome to stay until you get your bearings. I just thought you might be anxious to put more distance between yourselves and Copper Creek. I am, she admitted, but Hannah needs rest and so do I. She hesitated before adding, if we could impose on your kindness for a few days, I could perhaps help with chores to earn our keep. No need for that, Lucas said, though he appreciated the offer, but you're welcome to stay as long as necessary. As he prepared to leave for town, Lucas found himself oddly reluctant to go. It had been years since he'd had company at the ranch, and longer still since he'd felt responsible for anyone but himself. Is there anything you need from town? He asked, securing his hat against the morning breeze. Margareta thought for a moment. Perhaps some paper and pencils for Hannah? She loves to draw, and it might help pass the time. The simple motherly request touched something in Lucas. Of course. I'll be back before sundown. The cabin isn't much, but Make yourselves at home." The 10-mile ride to Silver Creek gave Lucas time to think. The small trading post had grown since he'd first settled in the area, boasting a general store, saloon, smithy, and a telegraph office that doubled as the stagecoach station. It wasn't much, but it was civilization of a sort. At the general store, Lucas purchased the usual supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, along with paper and pencils for Hannah, and a modest length of blue calico fabric he thought Margareta might like. He was settling his bill when the door opened, admitting 3 rough-looking men who immediately commanded the attention of everyone present. Lucas recognized the type immediately hired guns, not local ranchers or miners. They carried themselves with the casual arrogance of men accustomed to intimidating others, their eyes scanning the store's occupants with predatory assessment. "Looking for a woman and kid," the tallest one announced without preamble. "Dark-haired woman, blonde little girl, ran off from Copper Creek 3 days back. Her man's offering $100 to anyone who helps bring them home." The storekeeper, a mild-mannered man named Wilson, shook his head. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description." The man's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that? Pretty woman, talks with a foreign accent. Can't have been many strangers passing through lately." Lucas kept his expression neutral, continuing to gather his purchases as if the conversation held no interest for him. Inside, though, his mind was racing. These men were obviously working for Hannah's father, and a $100 reward would turn many heads in these parts. "I said I haven't seen her," Wilson repeated firmly. "Now, you gentlemen buying anything or just passing through?" The tall man smirked. "We'll be around for a bit. Her trail leads this direction." His gaze shifted to Lucas. "You look like you know the area, friend. Got a ranch nearby?" Lucas met the man's stare evenly. "Just a small spread. Nothing interesting. You see anything of a woman and child, you let us know. Name's Hawkins. I'll be at the saloon." Lucas nodded noncommittally and finished his business. Outside, he secured his purchases to his horse, his mind already formulating a plan. If these men were searching the area, it wouldn't be long before someone pointed them toward his isolated ranch. The territorial deputy only came through once a month, and Lucas knew better than to expect the law to intervene in what would be deemed a domestic dispute. He made one final stop at the telegraph office, sending a message to an old acquaintance in Helena. It might not amount to anything, but it was worth trying. As he rode home, Lucas kept watch for any sign of being followed, taking a circuitous route back to the ranch just to be sure. When he arrived, he found Margareta hanging laundry in the yard while Hannah chased butterflies nearby. The domestic scene struck him powerfully, his lonely homestead suddenly alive with the sounds and movements of family life. It was something he'd never expected to experience. Margareta shaded her eyes against the sun as he approached. "You're back earlier than expected." Lucas dismounted, his expression serious. "We need to talk." Inside, after Hannah was occupied with her new pencils and paper, Lucas explained about the men in town and their search. He watched the color drain from Margareta's face. "It's Victor," she whispered. "He sent men after us." "Who is he exactly?" Lucas asked. "What kind of man has the resources to offer that kind of reward?" Margareta sank into a chair. "Victor Blackstone owns the largest mine in Copper Creek. He came from California with money and connections. I was working as a seamstress when we met. He was charming at first." She glanced at Hannah to ensure she wasn't listening. "By the time I realized his true nature, I was already carrying his child. He never married me, but he kept us in a house near the mine, treated us like possessions." "And when you tried to leave?" Her hand unconsciously touched the fading bruise on her face. "The first time, he locked us in the house for a week. The second time, he threatened to take Hannah away permanently. This last time, he nearly killed me. A friend helped us escape while he was away on business." Lucas processed this information quietly. These men will find this place eventually. It's only a matter of time. "We should leave," Margareta said immediately, though fear was evident in her eyes. "I won't bring danger to your door after all your kindness." "And go where?" Lucas asked pragmatically. On foot with a child in unfamiliar territory? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. But I can't let him find Hannah. You don't understand what he's capable of. Lucas's expression darkened. I understand men like Victor Blackstone better than you might think, Miss Grayson. I've dealt with their kind before. Something in his tone made Margareta look at him with new awareness. What do you mean? Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. It had been years since he'd spoken of his past to anyone. Before I settled here, I worked as a bounty hunter. I tracked men who'd committed crimes and brought them to justice, or what passed for it in these territories. You were a lawman. Not exactly, Lucas admitted. I worked for whoever paid, sometimes sheriffs, sometimes private citizens, seeking justice the law couldn't provide. It wasn't a life I'm proud of, but I developed certain skills. Margareta studied him carefully. And you left that life behind? 5 years ago, after a job went wrong. His expression closed, indicating he wouldn't elaborate further. The point is, I know how men like Blackstone operate, and I know how to deal with them. What are you suggesting? Stay here, Lucas said firmly, at least for now. I sent a telegraph to a man I know in Helena. He works for a judge there. If Blackstone has enemies, and men like him always do, we might find leverage to keep him at bay legally. And if we don't, Lucas's jaw tightened, then I'll handle it another way. That evening, as Hannah slept and the night settled around the small cabin, Lucas and Margareta sat by the fire. The revelation of his former profession had created a new tension between them, but also a strange kind of trust. She knew now that he wasn't just a simple rancher, and he understood the gravity of the danger pursuing her. Tell me about your life before Copper Creek, Lucas said, breaking the comfortable silence. You're not from these parts originally. Margareta smiled faintly. Is it that obvious? I was born in Hungary. My family came to America when I was 12, settled in New York. My father was a carpenter, my mother a seamstress. Her expression grew distant. They both died in a tenement fire when I was 19. With nothing left for me there, I decided to try my fortune in the West. That took courage, Lucas observed. Most women wouldn't travel alone to such wild country. I wasn't alone at first. I traveled with a family heading to San Francisco, worked as their children's governess. But in St. Louis, I met a woman who told me about opportunities for seamstresses in the mining towns. The pay was better than I could hope for in California. She shook her head ruefully. I was naive. You were young, Lucas corrected gently. We all make mistakes when we're young. Some mistakes have longer consequences than others, she said, glancing toward the bedroom where Hannah slept, though I could never regret her. She's the one pure thing in my life, Lucas nodded, understanding. Children have a way of changing how we see the world. Do you have children, Mr. Parker? Margareta asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. I'm sorry, that's too personal. No, he said quietly. I never married, never had a family. The life I led didn't allow for it. Margareta studied his face in the firelight. Lucas Parker was a handsome man, probably in his early 30s, with the weathered features of someone who'd spent years under open skies. His eyes, though, held shadows that spoke of experiences best forgotten. And now? Your life as a rancher seems solitary. Lucas stared into the flames. It suits me. After years of chaos and violence, there's peace in routine and solitude. He looked up, meeting her gaze. At least, that's what I tell myself. The honesty in his admission created a moment of connection between them, two lonely souls who'd traveled difficult paths to reach this remote cabin on the Montana frontier. I should check the barn before turning in, Lucas said, breaking the spell of the moment. The night air's getting chilly. After he left, Margareta stood by the window, watching his tall figure move across the yard in the moonlight. In just 2 days, this stranger had shown her more kindness than she'd known in years. There was danger in such kindness. It could weaken her resolve, make her want things she couldn't afford to want. She and Hannah needed to keep moving, to find a place where Victor could never find them. Yet something about Lucas Parker made her want to stay, to believe in the possibility of safety. It was a dangerous feeling, one she couldn't trust. Outside in the barn, Lucas checked on his horses and secured the doors. The night was quiet, but he couldn't shake the feeling of approaching trouble. Men like Blackstone didn't give up easily, especially when pride was involved. It wasn't just about reclaiming Margareta and Hannah, it was about power, about not being defied. As he turned to leave, a soft sound caught his attention, the distant thunder of hooves. Lucas extinguished his lantern and moved to the barn door, peering out into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing, but then the moonlight revealed what he feared: 3 riders approaching from the east, moving slowly and deliberately. They had found the ranch sooner than expected. Lucas moved quickly back to the cabin, entering quietly so as not to alarm Margareta, who was still standing by the window. "We have company," he said in a low voice. 3 riders coming from the direction of town. Fear flashed across her face. "It's them, isn't it?" "Most likely. They're moving cautiously, probably not certain this is the right place yet." Lucas retrieved his rifle from above the fireplace. "Take Hannah and go to the root cellar. There's a trap door in the pantry floor." "What are you going to do?" Margareta asked, already moving toward the bedroom to get her daughter. "Talk to them," Lucas said grimly. "Hopefully that's all it will take." Margareta returned moments later with a sleepy Hannah in her arms. "Lucas," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Please be careful." He nodded, helping them into the concealed cellar and closing the trap door. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. I'll come get you when it's safe." Outside, Lucas positioned himself on the darkened porch, rifle in hand but not raised. He recognized the lead rider as Hawkins, the man from the general store. The 3 men reined in their horses about 20 yards from the cabin. "Evening, gentlemen," Lucas called calmly. "You're a long way from town." Hawkins squinted through the darkness. "Parker, isn't it? Didn't expect to find you awake at this hour." "I don't sleep much," Lucas replied evenly. "What brings you to my property?" The men exchanged glances before Hawkins spoke again. "We're looking for a woman and child. Word in town is you might have seen them." "Word in town is wrong," Lucas said. "I live alone." One of the other men, a wiry character with a pockmarked face, spat on the ground. "Then you won't mind if we take a look around? Our employer's offering good money for information." "I mind very much," Lucas said, his voice hardening. "This is my land, my home. You weren't invited." Hawkins leaned forward in his saddle. "Listen, Parker, we don't want trouble. The woman stole from her man money and some valuable items. He just wants what's his returned. If I see anyone matching your description, I'll be sure to let the law know," Lucas responded, deliberately ignoring the implication. "The law?" The third man laughed harshly. "Mr. Blackstone is the law in Copper Creek." "This isn't Copper Creek," Lucas pointed out. "Now I've been hospitable, but it's late and you're trespassing. I suggest you ride back to town." Hawkins studied him for a long moment. "You know, Parker, a man living alone out here might appreciate some extra cash." $100 is a lot of money." "I manage fine," Lucas said coolly. $200 then," Hawkins offered, "just for information." Lucas didn't respond, which seemed to frustrate the man. Hawkins sighed dramatically. "Have it your way, but we'll be watching the trails. If they're here, they can't hide forever." He turned his horse. "Let's go, boys." Lucas remained on the porch, rifle at the ready, until the sound of hooves faded into the distance. Even then, he didn't immediately go inside, instead circling the property to ensure they hadn't left someone behind to watch. When he was satisfied they were truly gone, he returned to the cabin and opened the cellar door. Margareta looked up at him from the darkness, Hannah asleep in her arms. "Are they gone?" she whispered. "For now," Lucas confirmed, helping her up. "But they'll be back, probably with more men. Blackstone has doubled the reward." Margareta's face paled. "They'll watch the roads." "Yes," Lucas agreed, "which means you can't leave, not yet. But they'll return to search the ranch more thoroughly next time." "What can we do?" The desperation in her voice was evident. Lucas thought for a moment. There's an old line shack about 5 miles west of here, near the creek. It's well hidden in a stand of cottonwoods. No one would think to look there. He moved to a chest in the corner and withdrew a small canvas bag. I'll take you there tomorrow at first light. We'll bring supplies to last a week or so. And then what? It was the question Lucas had been asking himself. By then, I should have a response to my telegraph. If we're lucky, it will give us leverage against Blackstone. And if we're not lucky? Margareta asked softly. Lucas met her gaze steadily. Then I'll have to deal with him directly. I won't let you risk your life for us, she said firmly. You've already done too much. I made my choice when I told you that you were safe here, Lucas replied. I don't give my word lightly, Miss Grayson. Margareta studied him in the dim light. Why, Lucas? Why would you do this for strangers? He was quiet for a long moment. Because sometimes the only thing standing between innocence and cruelty is someone willing to take a stand. I've spent too much of my life on the wrong side of that line. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of untold stories. Margareta reached out impulsively and placed her hand on his arm. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. The touch sent an unexpected current through Lucas. It had been years since he'd experienced such a simple human connection, and it awakened feelings he'd long thought dormant. He stepped back slightly, uncomfortable with his reaction. You should try to get some rest, he said, his voice rougher than intended. We leave at dawn. The journey to the line shack the next morning was tense but uneventful. Lucas led them on a circuitous route through dense woods and across shallow stretches of the creek to mask their trail. Hannah, excited by the adventure, rode in front of Lucas on his horse, while Margareta followed on a gentle mare from his small stable. The shack itself was primitive, but sound a single room with a small stove, rough-hewn table, and 2 narrow cots. Lucas had used it during the first winter on his ranch, before the main cabin was completed. It's not much, he apologized as they arrived, but it's dry and warm once the stove gets going. It's perfect, Margareta assured him, helping Hannah down from the horse. No one would think to look here. Lucas unloaded the supplies, enough food for at least a week, extra blankets, a few books he'd brought for Hannah, and the fabric he'd purchased in town, which he handed somewhat awkwardly to Margareta. I thought, maybe for a dress for Hannah, or whatever you might need it for. Margareta took the calico, visibly touched by the thoughtful gesture. It's beautiful. Thank you. They worked together to make the shack habitable, clearing out dust and cobwebs, starting a fire in the stove, and arranging the sparse furnishings. Hannah quickly claimed one of the cots, setting up a little area for her doll and drawing materials. I'll come back every other day with fresh supplies and news, Lucas explained as he prepared to leave. If there's any trouble, there's a hunting rifle above the door, loaded and ready. But no one knows about this place except my neighbor O'Brien, and he's too old and cantankerous to talk to strangers. Margareta nodded, though anxiety was clear in her eyes. Be careful returning to the ranch. They might be watching. I know these hills better than they do, Lucas assured her. I'll be fine. As he mounted his horse, Hannah ran out to him. Mr. Lucas, I made this for you. She handed up a piece of paper with a childish drawing of what appeared to be 3 stick figures, a tall man, a woman, and a small girl standing in front of a house. That's you and Mama and me, she explained proudly. At your house. Lucas stared at the simple drawing, unexpectedly moved. It's wonderful, Hannah. Thank you. Mama says we have to stay here now, but someday can we go back to your house? The innocent question caught him off guard. I hope so, Hannah. When it's safe. Margareta came to collect her daughter, giving Lucas an apologetic look. Come inside, Hannah. Mr. Parker needs to go now. As Lucas rode away, the image of the drawing stayed with him, a child's vision of family, something he'd never allowed himself to imagine. It was a dangerous fantasy, especially now, with danger closing in around them. Back at the ranch, Lucas found everything as he'd left it, with no sign that anyone had returned in his absence. Still, He took extra precautions, setting up subtle alarms around the property perimeter strings with tin cans that would rattle if disturbed, branches positioned to snap loudly if stepped on. Small measures, but they might provide warning if Blackstone's men returned. That evening, as he sat alone in his cabin, Lucas was struck by how empty it felt. After just a few days with Margareta and Hannah, the silence seemed oppressive. He'd grown accustomed to Hannah's cheerful chatter, to the sound of Margareta moving about the kitchen, to conversations by the fire that stretched late into the night. It was dangerous to become attached, he reminded himself. Once this situation was resolved, they would move on perhaps to Helena or further east, somewhere beyond Blackstone's reach. That was as it should be. His solitary existence was a choice he'd made long ago, after the incident that had driven him from his former life. Yet, as he prepared for bed, Lucas found himself thinking of Margareta's quiet strength, of the way she protected Hannah with fierce devotion, of the rare moments when she smiled and transformed her entire face. She deserved a fresh start, a life free from fear and violence. If he could help provide that, perhaps it would balance some of the scales from his past. The next 3 days passed in a tense holding pattern. Lucas maintained his normal routines, tending to cattle and making necessary repairs around the ranch, all while staying alert for any sign of Blackstone's men. Each evening, he rode to the line shack by a different route, bringing fresh food and news from town. On the 4th day, a response to his telegraph finally arrived. Lucas collected it from the telegraph office in Silver Creek, aware that his movements were being observed by one of Hawkins' men lounging outside the saloon across the street. The message was brief but promising. Blackstone under investigation. Stop federal marshals interested in mining operations. Stop Judge Webster. Requests details on woman and child. Stop protection possible with testimony. Stop it wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope, the first real possibility that Margareta and Hannah might find legal protection from Blackstone's reach. Lucas tucked the telegraph into his pocket and made his usual purchases at the general store, careful not to appear hurried or concerned. As he left town, he noticed 2 riders following at a distance. He considered trying to lose them, but decided against it. Let them follow him to the empty ranch. It would reinforce his claim that he was alone. Sure enough, the men maintained their distance all the way to his property, watching from a ridge as he unloaded supplies and went about his evening chores. Only when darkness fell did they finally depart. Lucas waited an extra hour before setting out for the line shack, taking an especially circuitous route through a rocky stream bed that would leave no tracks. When he arrived, he found Margareta sitting outside on a crude bench, watching the sunset while Hannah slept inside. "I was worried," she said as he approached. "You're later than usual." "Had to make sure I wasn't followed," Lucas explained, dismounting. "I received a response to my telegraph." He showed her the message, watching hope bloom on her face as she read it. "A federal investigation? Is it possible?" Lucas nodded. "Judge Webster is a straight arrow. If he's involved, it's serious. Blackstone might have the local law in his pocket, but federal marshals are different. They can't be bought so easily." "What would I need to do?" Margareta asked, her expression turning serious. "Testify about your treatment, about anything you know regarding his business practices." Lucas hesitated. "It could be dangerous. Men like Blackstone don't go down easily." "I know," she said quietly. "I worked in his house for 3 years. I overheard conversations, saw documents. He brought in Chinese laborers illegally, forced them to work in dangerous conditions. When some died in a tunnel collapse last year, he had the bodies buried secretly to avoid an investigation." Her voice hardened. "I've been afraid for so long, but if there's a chance to stop him, to truly be free of him." Lucas saw the determination in her eyes and felt a surge of admiration. This woman had endured so much, yet retained her courage and moral compass. "I'll send a reply tomorrow," he said, "but we need to be careful. Blackstone's men are watching the ranch more closely now." Margareta nodded, then surprised him by reaching for his hand. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything you've risked for us." The simple touch sent warmth through him, and Lucas found himself holding her hand longer than necessary. In the fading light, with her face softened by the sunset's glow, Margareta was strikingly beautiful. The realization unsettled him, and he gently withdrew his hand. "I should go," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "It's getting dark." Disappointment flickered across Margareta's face, but she nodded in understanding. "When will you return?" "Day after tomorrow. I need to send the reply and gather more information." He hesitated. "Will you be all right here?" "We'll be fine," she assured him. "Hannah's quite taken with this adventure, as she calls it." Lucas mounted his horse, but before leaving, he turned back to her. "Margareta, whatever happens, I won't let him hurt you or Hannah again. I promise you that." The intensity in his voice surprised them both. Margareta looked up at him, her expression unreadable in the growing darkness. "Be safe, Lucas," she said softly. "Please." The ride back to the ranch gave Lucas time to wrestle with his conflicted emotions. He'd come to care for Margareta and Hannah more than he'd intended, more than was wise given their circumstances. Once Blackstone was dealt with, they would need to build a new life somewhere far from here, somewhere safe, with opportunities for Hannah's future. His isolated ranch in the Montana wilderness was no place for them. Yet the thought of them leaving created an emptiness inside him that he couldn't ignore. In just a week, they had brought life and warmth to his solitary existence, awakening long dormant parts of himself. He'd begun to imagine possibilities he'd denied himself for years: a family, a shared life, a future beyond mere survival. Lucas was so absorbed in these thoughts that he almost missed the signs of intrusion at his ranch. Approaching carefully, he noticed fresh hoofprints in the yard and the subtle displacement of one of his warning systems. Someone had been there while he was gone, perhaps was still there. He dismounted a distance away, tethering his horse in a stand of trees, and approached on foot with his rifle ready. The cabin was dark, but that meant nothing. Drawing on skills from his bounty hunter days, Lucas circled the property, checking the barn first and finding it empty. As he crept toward the cabin, a voice called out from the darkness. "That's far enough, Parker." Lucas froze, recognizing Hawkins' voice. The man stepped from the shadows near the porch, revolver drawn. Two more figures emerged from either side of the cabin. "Looking for something, Parker? Or should I say, someone?" Hawkins asked smugly. "Just returning home," Lucas replied evenly, calculating his odds against 3 armed men. They weren't good. "After visiting your friends at that old line shack by the creek?" Hawkins shook his head. "You're not as clever as you think. We've been watching you for days." Cold dread settled in Lucas's stomach. If they knew about the line shack. "Where are they, Hawkins?" he demanded. The man laughed. "Don't worry. Mr. Blackstone wants his property returned undamaged. They're on their way back to Copper Creek as we speak." His expression hardened. "You, on the other hand, have caused a lot of trouble. Mr. Blackstone isn't pleased." Lucas's mind raced. If Blackstone's men had found the line shack, they would have had to leave someone behind to ambush him here. That meant they were stretched thin, perhaps only 2 or 3 men sent to capture Margareta and Hannah. "So what now?" Lucas asked, playing for time. "You going to shoot an unarmed man?" "Unarmed?" Hawkins scoffed. "Drop the rifle, Parker." Lucas slowly lowered the rifle to the ground, his mind calculating distances and angles. "Blackstone won't get away with this. There are federal marshals investigating him. Taking them by force will only add to his troubles." Something flickered in Hawkins's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. "You're bluffing." "Check my pocket," Lucas said calmly. "Telegraph from Judge Webster and Helena. Blackstone's mining operation is under investigation. Kidnapping a potential witness won't help his case." Hawkins hesitated, then nodded to one of his companions. "Check him." As the man approached, Lucas remained perfectly still. Years of hunting dangerous men had taught him to recognize the critical moment when it arrived, the split second when action could turn the tide. The man reached into Lucas's coat pocket and withdrew the telegraph. As he turned slightly to read it in the moonlight, Lucas made his move. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisting until the bone snapped. Before the scream could leave the man's throat, Lucas had taken his revolver and fired at Hawkins, catching him in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. The third man got off a shot that whistled past Lucas's ear before Lucas returned fire, hitting him in the leg. In seconds, all three were disarmed and groaning on the ground. "Where are they taking Margareta and Hannah?" Lucas demanded, standing over Hawkins with the stolen revolver. Hawkins clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face contorted with pain. "North Trail, back to Copper Creek. Blackstone sent his foreman Reeves and 2 others. When did they leave?" "About an hour ago," Hawkins gasped. "You'll never catch them." Lucas quickly bound the 3 men with rope from the barn, leaving them secured to the porch posts. They wouldn't die from their wounds, but they wouldn't be following him either. Within minutes, he had gathered fresh ammunition, water, and his fastest horse. The North Trail was the most direct route to Copper Creek, but it was also rough terrain. If Margareta and Hannah were being transported unwillingly, they couldn't move quickly, especially at night. He could still catch them. He had to. Lucas rode hard into the darkness, pushing his horse to its limits. The moonlight provided just enough illumination to follow the trail, though he had to slow at particularly treacherous stretches. All the while, his mind tortured him with images of Margareta and Hannah, frightened and alone, being dragged back to the man who had abused them. After about 2 hours of hard riding, Lucas reined in at a high point overlooking a valley. In the distance, he could make out the flicker of a campfire. Travelers stopped for the night. It had to be them. Blackstone's men wouldn't risk continuing through the difficult terrain in darkness, especially with a woman and child in tow. Lucas approached with caution, leaving his horse tethered a safe distance away. As he crept closer, he could make out 3 men around the fire, passing a bottle between them. A short distance away, Margareta sat with Hannah in her arms, their hands bound, a blanket wrapped around them against the night chill. One of the men, a broad-shouldered figure Lucas assumed was Reeves, leaned toward Margareta. "Should have never run in the first place," Lucas heard him say. "Mr. Blackstone was real upset. Don't expect a warm welcome." "He'll kill me this time," Margareta replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Reeves shrugged. "That's between you and him. My job's just to bring you back." Lucas assessed the situation carefully. 3 armed men, all alert despite their drinking. A direct confrontation risked Margareta and Hannah getting caught in crossfire. He needed a distraction. Moving silently through the underbrush, Lucas circled around to the horses tethered on the far side of the camp. He loosened their reins, then struck one hard on the flank. The startled animal reared and bolted, causing the others to follow in panicked flight. "The horses!" one of the men shouted, all 3 scrambling to their feet and rushing after their fleeing mounts. Lucas moved swiftly into the camp from the opposite direction. Margareta's eyes widened as she saw him, but she had the presence of mind not to call out. He quickly cut her bonds with his knife. "Can you ride?" he whispered urgently. She nodded, gathering Hannah close. "Yes." "Follow me, quickly." They slipped away from the camp toward where Lucas had left his horse. Behind them, they could hear the men cursing as they chased their scattered mounts. "They'll realize we're gone soon," Lucas said as he helped Margareta and Hannah onto his horse. "We need to find cover." He led the horse off the trail into dense woods, moving as quickly as they dared in the darkness. Hannah remained remarkably quiet, seeming to understand the gravity of their situation despite her young age. After nearly an hour of tense travel, they reached a small box canyon Lucas knew from his hunting expeditions. A narrow entrance opened into a wider space with high walls, a spring-fed pool, and enough grass for the horse. Most importantly, it was easily defensible and nearly impossible to find, unless you knew exactly where to look. "We'll be safe here until dawn," Lucas said, helping them dismount. "Then we can decide our next move." Margareta set Hannah down gently on a bed of soft grass. The child had finally succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping despite the night's traumatic events. Only when she was sure Hannah was comfortable did Margareta turn to Lucas, emotion overwhelming her composure. Without a word, she stepped into his arms, burying her face against his chest. Lucas held her as she trembled, not with tears, but with the release of fear and tension. "I thought we were lost," she whispered, "when they found us at the shack. I thought I'd never see you again." Lucas tightened his embrace, resting his chin on top of her head. "I made you a promise, remember? I won't let him hurt you or Hannah." Margareta pulled back slightly, looking up at him in the moonlight that filtered into their shelter. "You risked your life for us. Again." "I'd do it 100 times over," Lucas admitted, the words coming from a place of truth he couldn't deny any longer. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been growing since that first night in the barn. Margareta reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with wonder. "Lucas," she whispered, his name a question and an answer all at once. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, she rose on tiptoes to meet him, their lips coming together in a kiss that spoke of longing, gratitude, and something deeper neither was ready to name. When they finally parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers, his heart racing. "We should rest," he said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." They settled beside Hannah, sharing Lucas's coat as a blanket. Margareta curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, and despite the danger that still surrounded them, Lucas felt a peace he hadn't known in years. "What happens now?" Margareta asked softly, careful not to wake Hannah. Lucas gazed up at the stars visible through the canyon opening. "We can't go back to the ranch or the line shack. They'll be watching both." "Copper Creek is out of the question," Margareta added. "Helena," Lucas decided. "It's our best option. Judge Webster is there, and the federal marshals. With your testimony about Blackstone's operations, they can build a case against him." "It's at least 3 days' journey from here," Margareta pointed out. "Blackstone will have men searching every trail." Lucas nodded grimly. "We'll have to take the long way, through the high country. It won't be easy with Hannah, but it's our safest route." Margareta was quiet for a long moment. "And after Helena? If they build a case against Victor, if we're finally free of him, what then?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Lucas had been avoiding thinking beyond the immediate crisis, but Margareta's kiss had changed everything. "That depends," he said carefully. "What do you want, Margareta?" She shifted to look at him, her expression earnest in the moonlight. "I want safety for Hannah, a place where she can grow up without fear." She hesitated before adding, "And I want to stop running, to build something real, something lasting." "With me?" Lucas asked, hardly daring to hope. Margareta's smile was answer enough, but she said the words anyway. "With you, if that's what you want too." Lucas had never allowed himself to envision such a future, a life shared with someone who understood his past and accepted him despite it, a chance to be a father to a child who needed one. Now that the possibility lay before him, he realized how desperately he wanted it. "I want that more than anything," he admitted. "But my ranch, it's not much. It's isolated, rough. Not the kind of place most women would choose." "I'm not most women," Margareta reminded him, "and after everything we've been through, your ranch sounds like paradise to me. A place where we could be free, be ourselves." Her expression grew serious. "But first, we have to survive Blackstone." "We will," Lucas promised, drawing her closer. "Get some rest now. Dawn comes early." They set out at first light, taking a steep trail into the mountains that Lucas knew would be difficult for pursuers to follow. Their progress was slow with 3 people on 1 horse, but they pushed on steadily, stopping only when necessary for Hannah's sake. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley. In the distance, they could see riders, at least 6 of them, spreading out along the lower trails. "Blackstone's not giving up easily," Lucas observed grimly. He never does, Margareta replied, her arm tightening around Hannah, who sat in front of her on the saddle. They continued their ascent, the trail growing narrower and more treacherous. By evening, they had reached a small plateau where an old trapper's cabin provided shelter for the night. Lucas built a small fire inside, careful to minimize smoke that might give away their position. As Hannah slept, exhausted from the day's journey, Lucas and Margareta sat close together, speaking in hushed tones. "If we keep to this pace, we should reach Helena in 4 days," Lucas explained. "There's a settlement called Riverside about halfway. We can get supplies there." Margareta nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you think Judge Webster will really help us?" "I know he will," Lucas assured her. "He's been trying to build a case against men like Blackstone for years. Your testimony could be the key." "And what about you?" she asked. "Going against Blackstone publicly, it could make you a target, too." Lucas smiled faintly. "I've dealt with worse men than Victor Blackstone." Margareta studied his face in the firelight. "You never told me what happened. Why you left your life as a bounty hunter." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, debating whether to share the story he'd kept buried for 5 years. But Margareta deserved to know the man she was considering a future with. "My last job," he finally said, "was tracking a man named James Donovan. He'd robbed a bank in Wyoming, killed 2 people. The bounty was substantial, and the description seemed straightforward. I tracked him for weeks, finally cornered him in a cabin similar to this one." Lucas's expression darkened. "When I confronted him, he swore his innocence, said he'd been framed by a business partner. I didn't believe him. There was a struggle, and I shot him." He paused, the memory still painful. As he lay dying, he asked me to look in his saddlebag. There was a letter there, evidence that proved his story. He had been framed, and I'd killed an innocent man. Margareta took his hand, holding it tightly. "You couldn't have known." "I should have listened," Lucas said bitterly. "I was so focused on the bounty, on my reputation for always getting my man, that I didn't take the time to question whether he was guilty. After that, I couldn't continue. I took the evidence to the authorities, saw the real criminal brought to justice, and walked away from that life. Bought this land and vowed to live quietly, to do no more harm." "You've done nothing but good for us," Margareta said softly. "You saved us, Lucas." He looked at her, his eyes troubled. "But at what cost? I've returned to violence because of Blackstone. Men are wounded, perhaps worse, back at my ranch." "To protect us," Margareta reminded him. "There's a difference between violence for its own sake and standing between innocence and harm. You know that." Her words eased something in him, a fear that in helping her, he was reverting to the man he'd tried to leave behind. Perhaps there was a middle path, one where his skills could serve protection rather than pursuit. "Thank you," he said simply, drawing her closer, "for seeing more in me than I sometimes see in myself." They spent the night holding each other, finding comfort in closeness as they faced the uncertain journey ahead. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern, hard travel by day through increasingly rough terrain, nights spent in whatever shelter they could find. Hannah proved remarkably resilient, treating the journey as an adventure rather than a flight for safety. Her innocent questions and observations often brought unexpected moments of joy amid their tension. On the 4th day, as they descended toward the valley where Helena lay, Lucas allowed himself to believe they might succeed. They had seen no sign of pursuers for 2 days, and the territorial capital lay just hours ahead with it, the promise of law and protection. They stopped at a stream to rest and water the horse. Hannah splashed happily at the edge while Margareta washed trail dust from her face. Lucas stood watch, scanning the horizon for any sign of threat. "We should reach Helena by nightfall," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Judge Webster has an office near the courthouse. We'll go there directly." Margareta straightened, pushing back damp hair from her face. "I can hardly believe it, after all this time running, to finally have hope of freedom." Lucas was about to respond when movement caught his eye, riders emerging from the trees a 1/4 mile downstream. His hand went instinctively to his revolver. "Get Hannah," he said urgently. "We need to move. Now." Margareta didn't question him, immediately calling Hannah from the water. But it was too late for an easy escape. The riders had spotted them and were approaching rapidly, 5 men, with Victor Blackstone himself in the lead. Lucas had never met the man, but he recognized the type expensively dressed despite the trail dust, radiating arrogance and entitlement. Blackstone reined in about 30 yards away, his men spreading out to either side. "Margareta!" he called, his voice deceptively pleasant. "This little adventure has gone on long enough, don't you think? It's time to come home." Margareta stood frozen, Hannah clutched to her side. Lucas positioned himself in front of them, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. "She's not going anywhere with you, Blackstone," he said evenly. Blackstone regarded him with cold assessment. "You must be Parker. My men told me about you." His gaze shifted back to Margareta. "Is this worth dying for? Him? Because that's what will happen if you don't come with me now." "The only one risking death here is you," Lucas replied. "Federal marshals are waiting for us in Helena. They're very interested in your mining operation, especially those Chinese workers who died in your tunnel." Blackstone's expression hardened. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Lucas challenged. "Judge Webster has opened an investigation. Margareta's testimony will be the final nail in your coffin. Murder, exploitation, kidnapping enough to see you hang." Uncertainty flickered across Blackstone's face, quickly replaced by calculation. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement." "Money solves most problems." "Not this one," Lucas said firmly. "Turn around and ride away. That's your only option." Blackstone's facade of civility crumbled. "I don't take orders from ranch hands. That woman is mine. The child is mine. And I'll kill anyone who stands in my way." He nodded to his men. "Take care of him. Bring the woman and child to me." Everything happened at once. The men drew their weapons as Lucas pushed Margareta and Hannah toward the cover of nearby rocks. He drew and fired in one smooth motion, hitting the closest rider in the chest. Return fire sent bullets whizzing past his head as he dove for cover. From behind the rocks, Lucas exchanged shots with Blackstone's men, carefully conserving ammunition. He managed to wound another, but 3 remained, including Blackstone himself, who had dismounted and was working his way around their position. "Lucas!" Margareta's frightened cry came from behind him. He turned to see Blackstone dragging Margareta from their shelter, a revolver pressed to her temple. Hannah screamed, trying to reach her mother. "Drop the gun, Parker," Blackstone ordered, "or she dies right here." Lucas froze, his revolver half raised. Margareta's eyes met his, wide with fear but also with a determination he recognized. "Don't," she mouthed silently. In that suspended moment, Lucas saw Margareta shift her weight subtly. Understanding her intent, he kept Blackstone's attention focused on him. "Let her go," he demanded. "This is between you and me now." Blackstone laughed coldly. "There's nothing between us except a woman who belongs to me. Now drop the gun, or I paint these rocks with her brains." As he spoke, Margareta suddenly drove her elbow hard into Blackstone's ribs, twisting away from his gun. Lucas fired instantly, his bullet striking Blackstone in the shoulder, spinning him around. But Blackstone recovered quickly, raising his revolver toward Margareta as she scrambled toward Hannah. Lucas threw himself forward without thinking, tackling Blackstone as the gun discharged. They fell together, wrestling for control of the weapon. Blackstone was surprisingly strong for a man accustomed to others doing his violence for him. He managed to slam the revolver against Lucas's temple, momentarily stunning him. As Lucas's vision blurred, he saw Blackstone aim the gun at his face, a triumphant sneer on his lips. The shot that came wasn't from Blackstone's revolver, however. It was from behind them, from Margareta, who stood with Lucas's dropped weapon in her shaking hands. Blackstone's expression registered shock before he collapsed, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The remaining men, seeing their employer fall, threw down their weapons in surrender. Lucas staggered to his feet, moving quickly to Margareta, who stood transfixed, the revolver still extended. Gently, he took the weapon from her hands. "It's over," he said softly. You're safe now. You're both safe." Margareta looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, then turned to Hannah, who stood trembling behind the rocks. Dropping to her knees, she gathered her daughter in her arms. "Is the bad man gone, Mama?" Hannah asked in a small voice. "Yes, sweetheart," Margareta assured her, stroking her hair. "He's gone, and he can never hurt us again." With Blackstone dead and his men captured, their journey to Helena took on a different purpose. Judge Webster received them immediately, taking statements about both Blackstone's pursuit and his illegal mining operations. The federal investigation moved forward, ultimately revealing a network of corruption that extended throughout Copper Creek and beyond. In the aftermath, Lucas and Margareta found themselves staying in Helena longer than expected. There were testimonies to give, legal matters to settle, decisions to make about the future. Blackstone had died without heirs, and to everyone's surprise, his estate was ordered to pay significant compensation to Margareta for years of effective imprisonment and abuse. "What will you do with it?" Lucas asked one evening as they walked through Helena's streets, Hannah skipping ahead of them. Margareta considered the question carefully. "I thought perhaps I might invest in a cattle ranch. I hear they can be quite profitable with the right management." Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Her smile was radiant. "I'm saying that Hannah and I have discussed it, and we've decided that your ranch is exactly where we want to be. If you'll have us, that is." "If I'll have you," Lucas repeated incredulously. "Margareta, you and Hannah are everything I never knew I wanted. My home has felt empty without you." "Then let's go home," she said simply. "Together." 2 weeks later, they returned to Lucas's ranch. The cabin seemed smaller somehow when viewed through new eyes that saw not just what it was, but what it could become. Over the following months, with Margareta's investment and Lucas's labor, the ranch transformed. They added rooms to the cabin, improved the barn, increased the cattle herd, and planted a garden that Margareta tended with loving care. Hannah thrived in her new environment, growing stronger and more confident each day. She followed Lucas everywhere, absorbing his knowledge of horses and cattle, declaring herself a real cowgirl to anyone who would listen. Her nightmares about the bad man gradually faded, replaced by dreams of adventures on the open range. On a crisp autumn evening, 1 year after they had first met, Lucas and Margareta stood on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. Hannah was already asleep inside, exhausted from a day of helping with the harvest. "I have something for you," Lucas said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a simple gold band. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Margareta's eyes widened. "Lucas, I know I'm just a rancher," he continued, suddenly nervous, "and you could have chosen a more comfortable life with your inheritance. But I love you, Margareta. I love Hannah as if she were my own. I want us to be a family in every way." Tears filled Margareta's eyes as she extended her hand. "We already are a family. This just makes it official." The wedding was small but joyful, attended by neighbors and new friends from the surrounding ranches. Judge Webster himself came from Helena to officiate, commenting that it was the happiest ending to any case he had ever overseen. As years passed, the Parker Ranch prospered. They added to their family twin boys born 2 years after their wedding, with Lucas's dark hair and Margareta's determined spirit. Hannah grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's compassion and her adoptive father's strength. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Lucas and Margareta would sit by the fire and remember those first desperate days, the woman hiding in the barn, the man who had promised her safety, the journey that had nearly cost them everything but had given them so much more in return. "Do you ever regret it?" Margareta asked once, "taking in 2 strangers that night? All the danger it brought to your door?" Lucas gazed at the woman who had transformed his solitary existence into a life filled with purpose and love. "The only thing I regret," he said, drawing her close, "is that I didn't find you sooner." Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched vast and untamed, but within the walls of their home, Lucas and Margareta had created something even more powerful, a haven of love and security built from courage, sacrifice, and the simple words that had started it all. Rest, you're safe here tonight.